It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not in my neighborhood, not at that hour, not on that side of my fence. Low engines, heavy ones, the kind that vibrate through your windows before your brain even catches up. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee still in my hand, thinking maybe it was just a delivery truck that took a wrong turn. But then the rumbling didn't stop, it multiplied. And that's when I knew something was off. I walked over to the window, half curious, half annoyed, and what I saw didn't make any sense at all. Two large construction trucks were parked right along the back edge of my property. Men in reflective vests unloading lumber, toolboxes, even what looked like foundation equipment. They weren't just passing through, they were setting up. Now, I've lived in that house for almost 8 years. It's not some massive estate, just a quiet place in a neighborhood called Brook Hollow Ridge, the kind of community where people wave but don't necessarily know each other's last names, where nothing really dramatic ever happens unless someone paints their house the wrong shade of beige. So seeing a full-on construction crew casually treating the strip of land behind my fence like it was theirs, yeah, that wasn't normal. I stepped outside, still holding my coffee, and walked toward them slowly, trying not to jump to conclusions, because there's always a chance, right? Maybe they got the wrong address, maybe it's for a neighbor, maybe I'm the one missing something. But as I got closer, I could hear them talking about measurements, about where the garage entrance would go, about pouring concrete later that day. That's when my stomach dropped a little. Hey, I called out, not aggressive, just present. What's going on here? A man in a hard hat turned toward me, probably in his mid-40s, clipboard in hand. That kind of confident posture you only get when you think everything's already been approved. He gave me a quick nod, like I was just another passerby. Morning, he said. We're starting the garage build. Should be done in a couple weeks. I blinked. Garage for who? He looked at his clipboard, then back at me, slightly confused by my confusion. HOA project. Approved last month. This area back here's designated for community use. And there it was, that sentence that didn't sit right in my chest. This area back here. I turned my head slowly and looked at the land he was pointing to, the exact stretch of ground that sat just beyond my fence line, the one I had mowed, cleaned, and taken care of since the day I moved in. I think there's been a mistake, I said, keeping my voice steady, even though something inside me was already tightening. That's my property. He didn't laugh, but he did give me that look, the polite kind of doubt, like you're telling someone you saw a ghost. Sir, we've got the plans right here. HOA signed off on everything. This isn't private land. Now, here's the thing. I'm not the kind of person who jumps straight into arguments. I like facts. I like being sure before I push back. But in that moment, watching strangers walk around measuring what I knew, what I felt, was mine. It lit something up in me. I'm going to need you to hold off, I said, a little firmer this time. At least until I check something. He shrugged, not dismissive, just indifferent. You can take it up with the HOA, but we're on schedule. And just like that, he turned back to his crew, giving instructions, completely unfazed, like I was just background noise. I stood there for a second longer, watching them drive stakes into the ground, spray paint lines across the grass, my grass, and I could feel that quiet kind of frustration building, the kind that doesn't explode right away, but sits there, simmering. So I went back inside. The first call I made was to the HOA office. Now, if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know how this usually goes: hold music, transfers, people who speak in policies instead of answers. After a few minutes, I got connected to someone named Karen Whitmore, one of the board members. Her voice was calm, practiced, the kind that sounds like she's had this conversation before, just not with me. I understand you have a concern about the new construction project, she said. Yeah, I replied, pacing slowly across my living room, glancing out the window every few seconds. There's a crew out here right now, setting up to build a garage on my property. There was a brief pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone pulling up a file. According to our records, she said, the land behind your fence is designated as shared community space. I stopped walking. No, I said, quieter now but sharper. It's not. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Well, Mr. Darren Cole. Mr. Cole, the documentation we have clearly outlines that section as HOA managed land. The project has already been approved and scheduled. And that's when something shifted in me. Not panic, not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity. Because I remembered something. The day I bought the house. Sitting at that long table, signing papers, flipping through documents I didn't fully understand at the time, but still kept every single one of them. I'm going to double-check my records, I said, because I'm pretty sure yours are wrong. She didn't argue, just gave me that corporate kind of response. Feel free to submit any documentation you have, and we'll review it. I hung up. Outside, the sound of drilling had started. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. This was going to be a fight. I walked into my home office, opened the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside it were the documents from when I bought the house, the deed, the closing papers, and somewhere in there, the survey map. As I spread them out across my desk, smoothing out the edges, I could feel my heartbeat just a little faster now, not from fear, but from anticipation. Because if I was right, if what I remembered was accurate, then everything happening outside that window wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake, a big one, and someone was about to realize it. I found the survey map exactly where I thought it would be, folded neatly between the deed and a stack of closing disclosures I hadn't looked at since the day I signed them. And for a second, I just held it there in my hands, not opening it yet, just feeling the weight of it, because somehow I already knew this piece of paper was about to decide how the rest of that day was going to go. Outside, I could hear metal clanking, someone shouting measurements, the low hum of machinery idling like it was waiting for permission to tear into the ground, and that contrast, the quiet inside my house versus the controlled chaos just beyond my fence, it made everything feel sharper, more real. I unfolded the map slowly across my desk, smoothing out the creases with both hands, leaning in close, tracing the lines with my finger the way I had years ago when the surveyor first explained it to me. Property boundaries, easements, markers, it was all there, clean and precise. No ambiguity, no gray area. And then I found it, the back line. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. Yeah, no, I muttered to myself. Because the line didn't just suggest I was right, it confirmed it. The exact stretch of land those workers were measuring, marking, and preparing to pour concrete on, it sat clearly, undeniably inside my property boundary. Not on the edge, not shared, mine. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at it, letting that realization settle in. And with it came something else, not just relief, but a kind of calm confidence. The kind you get when you're no longer guessing, when you're not arguing based on memory or feeling, but on something solid, something official. I folded the map carefully, tucked it under my arm along with the deed, and headed back outside. The scene had escalated while I was inside. One of the trucks had repositioned, a section of ground had already been spray-painted in bright orange lines, and two workers were setting up what looked like the frame for the foundation. They were moving fast now, like they had a schedule to keep and no intention of slowing down. The foreman spotted me walking up and gave me a quick glance, already half turned back to his crew. Look, I said, not raising my voice, but projecting just enough to cut through the noise. We need to stop for a second. He sighed, not dramatically, just enough to let me know I was becoming an inconvenience. Sir, I told you, you'll have to take it up with the HOA. We've got approval. I did, I replied, holding up the folded papers slightly. And they're wrong. That got his attention, not fully, but enough for him to pause. They said this is shared land, he said, like repeating it would somehow make it more true. I stepped closer, unfolding the survey map right there on the hood of one of the trucks, pressing it flat with my hand so the wind wouldn't catch it. Then you might want to look at this. He hesitated for a second, then leaned in, more out of obligation than concern. I watched his eyes scan the page, following the lines, the labels, the coordinates, and slowly, I saw that confidence start to shift. Not disappear completely, but crack just a little. This line right here, I said, pointing directly at it, steady and precise. That's my boundary. Everything on this side of it, including where your crew is standing, belongs to me. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he straightened up, glanced over at the area behind the fence, then back at the map. Hang on, he muttered, reaching for his radio. Let's pause for a minute. And just like that, the rhythm of the site broke. Not completely, but enough. A few workers slowed down. One of them stepped away from the equipment. Another looked over like something unexpected had just entered the script. The foreman stepped aside, speaking quietly into his radio, probably calling someone higher up, maybe the project manager, maybe directly to the HOA. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I didn't need to. The shift in energy was already happening. A few minutes later, 2 cars pulled up along the curb. Now, I had a feeling who that was before they even stepped out. Karen Whitmore was the first one I recognized, same voice from the phone, now attached to a person who carried herself with that same composed authority. Beside her was another board member, a guy named Leonard Briggs, someone I'd seen once or twice at neighborhood meetings, but never really spoken to. They walked toward the site with purpose, not rushed, but clearly aware that something had gone off track. "Mr. Cole," Karen said as she approached, offering a polite but tight smile. "We understand there's some confusion." "Yeah," I replied, holding the map in front of me again. "There is." Leonard stepped forward, already looking slightly irritated, like this was an interruption to something more important. "The project has been reviewed and approved," he said. "We followed all the proper procedures." "Then your procedures missed something," I said, and handed him the map. He took it, glanced at it briefly, then more carefully, his brow tightening as he traced the same line I had just minutes earlier. Karen leaned in beside him, her expression shifting from polite confidence to something more focused, more analytical. They didn't speak right away, just looked, recalculated, cross-checked whatever mental version of the plans they had brought with them. Behind us, the site had gone quieter. Not silent, but subdued, like everyone was waiting for a verdict. "This survey, when was this done?" Karen asked. "When I bought the house," I said. "Official, registered, part of the closing documents." Leonard flipped the page, checking for dates, stamps, signatures, all the things that turn a piece of paper into something you can't just brush off. "That area was marked as community space in our records," he said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "Then your records are outdated," I replied. "Or wrong." There was a long pause after that. The kind that stretches just enough to let everyone feel the weight of what's happening. Karen straightened up, pulling out her phone. "Let's verify this," she said, already dialing. Leonard nodded, stepping aside to make his own call. And just like that, the momentum shifted completely. What had started as a confident construction project, a done deal, was now unraveling in real time. I stood there, arms crossed loosely, not saying anything else, not needing to. Because at that point, it wasn't about convincing anyone anymore. It was about letting the truth catch up. Minutes passed. Calls were made. Names were mentioned, surveyors, county records, permit offices. I caught fragments of conversation, enough to piece together what was happening on their end, cross-checking documents, pulling up digital maps, comparing notes. And then I saw it. That moment. Karen lowered her phone slowly, her expression no longer composed, no longer certain, just quiet. Leonard looked at her, already knowing what she was about to say. And even before the words came out, I knew. "All right," she said finally, turning back toward me. "It appears there's been an error." Not a big dramatic admission. No apology yet. Just that word error. But it was enough. Because in that moment, everything outside my fence line, the trucks, the tools, the markings on the ground, all of it stopped meaning what it had meant an hour ago. The foreman walked back over, looking between us. "What do you want us to do?" he asked. Karen hesitated, just for a second. "Shut it down," she said. And just like that, the entire site shifted again. Engines cut. Tools were set down. Conversations changed tone. What had been forward motion, progress, turned into something else entirely. Retreat. And I stood there, watching it happen. That same quiet sense of disbelief from earlier now replaced with something steadier, something grounded. Because all it had taken, all of this, was one line on a map. You could feel it in the air the moment those words landed, shut it down. Not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that didn't need to be repeated. The kind of sentence that flips a switch nobody can turn back on. At first, it didn't even look real, like the crew wasn't sure if they'd heard it correctly. One guy kept holding a measuring tape stretched across the ground for a few seconds too long. Another stood there with a shovel in his hand, like he was waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a joke. But nobody did. The foreman exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck, and gave a small nod. "All right, pack it up," he called out. And just like that, everything reversed. Engines that had been idling with purpose shut off one by one. The low rumble fading into this strange, almost awkward silence. Tools got lifted instead of dropped, equipment got wheeled back instead of forward, and those bright orange lines sprayed across the dirt suddenly looked less like a plan and more like a mistake someone wished they could erase. I stayed where I was, not moving much, just watching. There's a certain kind of stillness that hits after tension breaks. Not relief exactly. Not yet. More like your body catching up with what just happened. And in that moment, I realized something. This could have gone very differently. If I hadn't been home that morning, if I'd ignored the noise, assumed it was someone else's project, trusted that someone in charge had it handled, they would have poured that foundation. And once concrete goes down, it's not just a conversation anymore. It's lawyers. It's months, maybe years of fighting to undo something that should have never happened in the first place. Karen and Leonard stood off to the side, speaking quietly now, their earlier confidence replaced with something more careful, more contained. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Records discrepancy. Liability. We'll need to address this formally. Eventually, Karen walked back over to me. Her tone had changed. Still professional, but softer now, less certain, more human. Mr. Cole. Darren. She corrected herself, like she was trying to reset the tone. I want to apologize. This shouldn't have happened. I nodded, not cold, not warm either, just measured. I figured as much, I said. She glanced over at the ground, at the markings, the disturbed patches of dirt where the crew had already started prepping. We'll take care of restoring the area, she added quickly. Anything that's been altered will be returned to its original condition. I let that sit for a second. I'm going to hold you to that, I said. You should, she replied. And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't sound like a board member. She sounded like someone who knew they'd made a mistake that couldn't just be smoothed over with policy language. Leonard, on the other hand, never really made eye contact with me again. He stayed near the trucks, arms crossed, occasionally checking his phone, like he was already trying to distance himself from the whole situation, or maybe just from me. Within 30 minutes, the site was almost unrecognizable. Where there had been movement, noise, purpose, now there was just flattened dirt, tire tracks, and a few faint lines of orange spray paint that the crew hadn't bothered to fully cover. The trucks pulled away one by one, slower this time, like even they knew the exit wasn't as clean as the arrival. A couple of neighbors had gathered across the street, not too close, just enough to watch without being part of it. You could see it on their faces, curiosity mixed with that quiet satisfaction people get when something unexpected breaks the routine of the neighborhood. One of them, a guy named Mark who lived 2 houses down, gave me a small nod as I walked back toward my place. Everything all right? He asked. Yeah, I said, glancing back once more at the empty space. Just a mix-up. He raised an eyebrow, like he knew there was more to it than that, but didn't press. Looks like you caught it in time, he said. Yeah, I replied. Just in time. And that was the part that stuck with me the most. Just in time. Because timing, that's the thing nobody talks about when stuff like this happens. People like to believe systems work, that approvals mean something's been checked, verified, signed off properly. And most of the time, maybe they do. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes a line on a map gets misread, a record doesn't get updated, someone assumes instead of confirms, and suddenly you've got a full construction crew building something on land that was never theirs to touch. A few days later, there was a neighborhood meeting. Now, usually those things are about minor stuff, landscaping, parking rules, someone's dog barking too much. But this one had a different energy. The room was fuller than usual. People weren't just there to listen, they had questions. Karen stood at the front, Leonard beside her, both of them noticeably more reserved than I'd ever seen them before. We want to address the recent incident involving the proposed garage construction, she began, her voice steady but lacking that earlier confidence. You could feel the shift in the room immediately. People leaned in, some exchanged glances, others just waited. It has come to our attention, she continued, that an error in our property records led to the approval of a project on land that is privately owned. That word again, error. But this time, it landed differently. Because now it wasn't just me standing there with a map. It was an entire room of residents realizing how close that mistake had come to becoming something permanent. Questions came quickly after that. How does something like that even happen? Are other properties affected? What checks are in place to prevent this again? And to her credit, Karen didn't dodge them. She didn't have perfect answers, But she didn't hide behind vague statements either. She admitted the oversight, explained that their internal records hadn't been updated to reflect a boundary adjustment made years ago, something that had been filed officially, but never fully integrated into the HOA system. In other words, the truth was there. They just hadn't looked closely enough. At one point, someone in the back asked, what would have happened if the homeowner hadn't caught it? And for a second, the room went quiet. Karen hesitated. Then she said, we would have had a much more complicated situation. That was probably the most honest thing she said all night. After the meeting, a few people came up to me. Some just curious, others a little shaken, like the whole thing had made them rethink how secure their own property lines really were. One older woman, Mrs. Alvarez, put it simply. Paper matters, she said. More than people think. I nodded. Yeah, I replied. It really does. Over the next week, the HOA followed through on their word. The ground was leveled, the markings faded, the area restored as close as possible to how it had been before. If you didn't know what had happened, you might have walked past it without thinking twice. But I knew, and I don't think I'll ever look at that stretch of land the same way again. Not because of what almost happened, but because of what it showed me. That ownership isn't about assumptions. It's not about who speaks the most confidently, or who has the bigger plan, or even who has the authority on paper that hasn't been checked in years. It comes down to something simpler than that. Proof. And sometimes, one document is all it takes to stop something that never should have started. Now I'm curious what you think. If I hadn't stepped outside that morning, if I'd trusted the system to get it right, and that garage had gone up, who would have been responsible? Would it still be considered an honest mistake, or something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because situations like this, they're more common than people realize. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and a very expensive problem is whether you decide to double-check. And if you've ever had something like this happen, where someone crossed a line, literally or otherwise, I'd like to hear that too. Because at the end of the day, boundaries only matter if someone's willing to defend them.